Hi, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer.
And welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop. It
Yes.
is week, what week is it, Phelim?
It's week 85. Week 85. That's 1 year, 8 months, and 1 week since the 2-week to flatten the curve. So we went from, hey, we need you to suspend all human rights for 2 weeks just to flatten the curve, to we're now at vaccine passports.
Yeah.
And you're going to get fired from your job if you don't take the vaccine.
And you'll notice that we're outdoors, and we're actually, as you know, in Belgrade, Serbia, and in the background is the Sava River. I've just had that corrected. I thought it was the Danube. The Danube is further up, and the two rivers connect here in the city. It might be a little bit loud for people out here, but we just thought we'd show you a little bit of what Belgrade looks like. What else is happening, Phelim?
Well, I just want to say we are filming today over in a nightclub over there, but it was so busy and so there's just a lot going on. We'll show you some pictures of it now, and we'll show you more later on. It's the My Son Hunter shoot is going ahead.
We're in week 2 of the My Son Hunter shoot.
But let's talk about what else is going on in the world first. What's on in the show? We have a message for the world experts meeting in COP and the world leaders meeting for the G20 in Rome or somewhere like that.
Exactly. A multi-millionaire profiteer, Ibram Kendi, has made himself redundant by discovering the truth about race in America.
Just how un-racist America is, actually.
Exactly.
And the last thing we're looking at how when identifying as your own sex
or a different sex
is not okay. Some liberals say you can identify as whatever sex you want,
but sometimes there are some occasions when you can't identify as another sex.
It's very confusing.
It's not okay at all to liberals.
Yes.
And the very last thing you ever want in your life is to allow liberals to take care of your children. And we are not talking about schools. That's an amazing story we're going to bring at the end.
It's an amazing story from Santa
But we
Barbara.
finished last week probably by we mentioned to you that John James was announced as joining the cast to play the role of Joe Biden, and it became a huge story. Here's some of the headlines, just some of the headlines that generated because of John James being announced. John James, as you'll remember, was Jeff Colby back in the day in Dynasty, and I have to say, sitting in the hotel in the evenings when we all gather, after the shoot, whatever time it is, even if it's midnight, and John James comes in, and I'm like sitting there thinking, the girl from Bundoran in County Donegal, Ireland, who used to be, lusting after Jeff Colby. And there he is sitting there in all his glory. And he's here's the thing, the lowdown on John James. He's an absolute gent. Yes, really lovely man.
He's had a great career. He was in the Colbys. He's a Golden Globe nominee.
Yes.
And he's we have actually shot a scene with John James as Joe Biden. We're not just releasing it at the moment.
We are not, but I can tell you, it is chilling.
It is fantastic how much he looks like and acts like Joe Biden, and also he brings other things to the role too, because it's a difficult role, mimicking someone, but also acting a role that in the script.
Yeah.
Because our Joe Biden is slightly different from the real Joe Biden, so there's all these different. It's a more difficult role than many of the other roles.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden is such a well-known character.
Well, segueing beautifully into some of the other roles, Lawrence Fox this last week decided, well, actually part of what we're doing actually is because he's representing Hunter Biden, he's acting the part of Hunter Biden, and Hunter Biden liked to take selfies, a lot of selfies, and those selfies appeared on his laptop. Now, warning, take all the children out of the room right now, and take anyone with a disposition, with a weak stomach out of the room as well, or with any kind of sensitivity, because we are going to show you what Lawrence Fox looks like as a selfie of Hunter Biden, and we're going to follow that by showing a photograph of what he was mimicking.
And we're going to put the two of them side by side.
You tell us who did it better.
Who did it better? The makeup and the hair and the costumers have done a wonderful job, and you'll see from these pictures now on the set, like today, over there filming, there are 66 extras.
But just before we even get on to today, let's look back at what happened last week. So last week we were in some amazing locations, including the Royal Palace here in Belgrade. There is a royal family, and they allowed us to access the grounds and to shoot inside this church, the Royal Palace Church.
Yes.
And amazing history. One story about Phelim that is unbelievable.
Well, here's the pictures. So when the communists took over in the late 40s, just after the war, they went in and look at what they did to this painting of Jesus on the roof of the chapel. They shot a hole right through his forehead, and they used the chapel as a stable. So I think that church, we used it as a setting for the Ukraine and for the corruption of the Ukraine, and I think that really brought home the moral corruption that surrounds communism and surrounded, to a certain extent, Hunter Biden and his dodgy dealings in the Ukraine and China and other places. And we're going to be talking about that a lot. So we're making the Hunter Biden movie. You guys funded it through crowdfunding. Please keep funding it. This is the story.
Go to mysonhunter.com.
This is the story Hollywood won't tell. This is the story. The mainstream media suppressed this before the last election. Don't forget that. And Twitter suppressed it, Facebook suppressed it. So that's why we're making this movie, because A, it's a great story, but B, we need to bring it to people who don't know. So,
and we also, like, one of the things we did last week as well was we created a homeless encampment. You might remember, those of you who have read Hunter Biden's memoir, Beautiful Things, which I think there were 14 or 15 people anyway read it. We read it because, of course, we read it so you don't have to read it. But there was a scene in a homeless encampment, let's say in Los Angeles. I think I won't get into the details of it. But we had to recreate a homeless encampment here. And I have to say, it was spooky how well the set designers did on doing that. You know, kind of disturbing for us, by the way, because it's like, that's home. That's where we live. Somewhere not far from that. But this week is week 2 of the shoot. And the first day of this shoot, we're shooting in a nightclub.
Let's just get to our stations. And action background, and action.
Because Hunter Biden spent a lot of time in nightclubs, right?
yes.
But it's amazing, you know, you're going to see some footage now of just the amount of people that are around. We got 66 extras this week.
And dozens of people setting the place up, doing lighting, doing
the makeup, the hair girls, the wardrobe. This is a huge, I mean, you know, even though it's a small budget, we have a really huge production and very professional crew here in Serbia. I'm really glad we came. Really amazing people. It's kind of extraordinary.
That's fun. We came here really because, hey, there'll be lots of strip bars that we could use. It's funny, the interesting fact about Belgrade, not that many strip bars. So we actually had to take a nightclub and kind of
turn it into a strip club.
Yeah, because I mean, most of what's in there we built.
Yes,
actually,
yeah.
It's very interesting what the
set designers
what
did.
the wonderful crew.
But in other things that are happening in the world, by the way, it's amazing. So Prince Charles, by the way, spoke to open COP26. He's also speaking for the G20. The Italian Prime Minister asked Prince Charles to open the G20. I have no idea why. I'm sure I'm missing something there, but I have no idea why he would be asked.
Well, it's a complete disaster for the royal family that he did that, by the way, because
the
royal family's strength is because they never use their political power, and once they start doing that, then they become divisive. Then half the country doesn't support what they are doing because they have to take a political stance once they get involved in politics. And the royal family is going to become superfluous if Prince Charles continues to pursue this. And, you know, he may think, oh, well, climate change is above politics. Climate change is the most political of them all. And, you know, I just want to say people, you're hearing now about increased forest fires, increased floods. Ask the people who say that. Okay, by the way, it's not true that there are increased fires or increased floods. The actual number of fires in America was more in the 30s. Maybe they're more destructive. Here's 2 questions you want to ask every reporter when they tell you that. First of all, has our way of managing forests changed in the last 30 years? And if the reporter doesn't know the answer to that, then you need to say to them, look, you need to find out the answer to that, and I'll take you seriously. Yeah. The answer is, of course, yes, we have changed the way we manage forests because we have California, for example, has periodic droughts. Trees die. We allowed loggers to go in and log the dead trees. It was a nice business, and now they're left there. They dry up, dry up, and literally you could put a match to them, and the whole thing.
And people do.
Yes, and often a lot of our homeless friends. So there's that, and the second thing you ask people is, have there been increased floods? And if those floods had happened, maybe they're more destructive. If those floods had happened in 1890, would they have been as destructive? And what I mean is, where there are so much more houses now in so many more places
that they shouldn't have built in the first place.
Or, you know, maybe once every 40 years flooding, people can live with that. But if these floods if these same floods, which they probably did, occurred 100 years ago, they weren't as destructive because people didn't live there. Towns are expanding, suburbs are expanding, exurbs are expanding, villages are expanding. So you ask a reporter that, and if they haven't got the answer for that, then you cannot take them seriously.
So Prince Charles, when he was speaking to the COP and to the G20, basically said, this is it. This is the last possible moment to save the planet. In fact, he said, it's the last chance saloon. And what's really interesting about this Prince Charles thing is that 10 years ago, we made a little video called Prince Charles Hypocrite, about Prince Charles saying basically the same thing, including, by the way, when he said he wanted to make it cool to use less stuff.
We are making it cool to use less stuff.
But the other thing that he said 10 years ago, which I think is really funny, 10 years ago he said we had 8 years to save the planet. 96 months. And guess what? Apparently we're still all here. So we're going to hear an awful lot for the next weeks about climate change, about what happens at the COP event in Glasgow. And again, they're doing all these dire predictions and the last chance saloon. It's really good to remember the history of dire predictions, the history of apocalyptic and I just took a note of a few of them. So in 1967, there was predicted a dire famine that would happen by 1975, that would basically wipe out most of the planet. In 1970, we were told there was going to be an ice age by 2000. Also in 1970, we were told that America would be subject to water rationing by 1974. We were told, I mean, there's so many of these.
In the early 1980s, at my secondary school, I was taught we were in the middle of a new ice age. And I remember the teacher, Mr. Lenihan, saying, you know, there's ice. This is the history of temperature up and down and up and down, and we're currently in a down. And the thing is, scientists don't know if it's a big down or just a little down, and then we're going to go back up again. And
they said, like in 1989, they said that 1988, they said that the Maldive Islands would be obliterated by 2018. So they're doing quite well. The Maldives, I think people are still going on holidays there.
And on their honeymoons?
And on their honeymoons. Do we not know somebody who went on their honeymoons there just very recently to the Maldives? We do. We do, and we're not going to say the name of it. Our friend Brandon. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
And actually, it's a friend of ours, Brandon, who is Brandon, and his name is really Brandon. Let's go,
Brandon. Let's go to the Maldives, Brandon.
We were told in 2002 that there would be a famine in 10 years if we don't give up eating fish, meat, and dairy. You know, by the way, the climate genius Al Gore predicted in 2008 that there would be no ice in the Arctic by 2013. The same genius, the other genius, Prince Charles, said that we had 96 months to save the world. That didn't happen. You know, there's loads and loads of these. Actually, you know what? We'll put the whole list of these up on the show notes because they're really worth looking at.
1972, oil will be depleted in 20 years.
Yes, oil was going to go. They were constantly telling you.
Department of Energy in 1977 said oil will peak in the 1990s.
And I love that. Do you remember the killer bees in the 1970s?
I remember that movie well.
You remember that well. And you know, there's just too many of them. You know, in 2005, there would be 50 million climate refugees by the year 2020.
In 1989, the UN warns that entire nations will be wiped off the face of the earth by 2000 from global warming.
But the thing that I think is incredible about Prince Charles, particularly incredible about Prince Charles, is that he said we had to live with less stuff, you know, and to make it cool to live with less stuff. This is a guy who lives in 4 ginormous homes. And, you know, he doesn't need to live in 4 ginormous homes. He could live in just 1 ginormous home, and that would cut a lot of carbon impact. And the other thing that he does is he flies around the world constantly telling people not to fly around the world. And I think I've got 2 words for him. And the polite ones are buzz off. Right?
By the way, another thing, Prince Charles, apparently, in our hotel, we have 3 different types of eggs in the morning. Do you see that? We have the 3-minute egg, the 5-minute egg, and the 7-minute egg.
Oh, indeed.
And when I saw that, I thought of the dear
Prince Charles.
Because Prince Charles famously, his valet in the morning, boils 3 different eggs for him at 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and 7 minutes. And depending on his mood in the morning, he wants soft, runny, or hard. Runny, soft, or hard, whatever.
Things.
I mean, think of the amount of carbon emissions
that would be saved.
If only he could make up his mind in the morning and tell the valet, tell Alfred to only, I want a 7-minute this morning, Alfred, you know.
But by the way, I mean, listen, Prince Charles is not the only extraordinary hypocrite here. This last week, we saw Joe Biden cruise into Rome. And he cruised into Rome, obviously, on a private jet, but then he went around Rome with an 85-car motorcade. You can see it now. We're playing that video right now.
Yeah.
I mean, 85 cars, that's overkill, right? I
Well,
mean, is that not overkill?
To-
I mean,
it's totally-
is the planet not
that-
dying?
that is like an African dictator. That's what that is. You know, and that is a sign of America's decline. Actually, when the leaders adopt these ways of outrageous African dictators, you know, who believe they're gods. You know, that's what that is. You know?
But by the way, the
carbon emissions.
The other thing that's really extraordinary about this COP event that's happening in Glasgow is that, you know, it's obviously necessary for 30,000 activists to also go to Glasgow, and from all over the world, by the way, at vast carbon emissions expenditure. An extraordinary thing about that is there are not enough hotel rooms in Glasgow for all these people, right, that are turning up. So all kinds of crazy stuff is happening, and people are getting to rent out their rooms at vast expense. And I mean, my point is, who's paying for it? Like, who's paying for all these activists to travel? It's not cheap to travel. If you're thinking of coming from, you know, wherever,
Sweden,
and particularly all these
Maldives.
indigenous people that are coming from all over Brazil and all over Africa, all flying into Glasgow. I would have thought unnecessarily, particularly with the technology we have now. Have they not heard of Zoom? Could they not do the conference via Zoom? If the planet's just about to die, wouldn't you think that'd be a good idea? But you know, it's not what they're doing, you know?
You know, you talk about dire predictions. I have a dire prediction, right? I'm not saying it's going to happen, but we talked about this in a couple of other episodes. There are countries across Europe where the electricity will be turned off.
Yes.
And the power will be turned off,
And
the
people will
heating
die.
and the heating will be turned off this winter. Now, hopefully it won't happen, and the government says it won't happen, which probably means it will happen. But we are at a critical level, and especially in places like Ireland that closed down coal-powered fire stations, closed down peat power stations to meet our global warming targets, and suddenly realised, oops, if it's a really cold winter, there will be power cuts.
Let me just interrupt you there by saying, by the way, interestingly enough, we're in Serbia. Serbia are not they're not buying into any of that. Serbia has very dependable electricity, supplied 70%, I believe, almost more than 70% supplied by coal.
Yeah.
Now, there's a downside to that, but I'll tell you one thing, they're not going to freeze to death in Serbia this winter.
Yeah.
And they will do in places like Germany. But talking of Germany, another thing that we've learned this week, so if ever, you know, it's funny, these elite leaders around the world are always teaching us stuff. You know what I mean? Teaching us stuff we didn't know. And this
it's good to know.
And it's good to know, and it's good to be taught. One thing that we have definitely learned is, we have learned that masks are total rubbish. And we've learned it from people as brilliant as Angela Merkel. Just look at her. So here she was, getting out of a car. She'd been in a confined space in a car, not wearing a mask. She quickly puts the mask on, and watch what she does when she walks in. Watch what she does when she walks in to meet one of the leaders from the COP group. Look what she does. I mean, and by the way, she's not alone. She's not alone. Let's look at the other ones. Let's look at President Biden. This is hysterical. Look at what he does. So he's meeting here with the president of Argentina, and he walks over to him. He's wearing the mask, and then, of course, because that's what you do with a mask, once you get close to people, you pull that old mask down, you know. And he's not the only one. Your very own film, Boris Johnson. You know, the conservative torchbearer, right? Look at this idiot, and look at his use of masks. The second the cameras are off, they take down the masks.
I should point out that Miss McElhinney is saying your own, because I had the geographical misfortune to be born in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In fact, it wasn't a geographical mistake. It was actually because Anne's people deserted us in 1921. And we've just had the centenary of that desertion when the Free State was formed, leaving people like me isolated in the Northern Ireland state.
And they've never really recovered from it.
No.
Anyway, that has no.
And we made our love on wastelands through the barricades.
Now. So, in another extraordinary story that happened just in the last few days, I just think this is an extraordinary story. Multi-millionaire Ibram Kendi, who people will know.
Ibram X. Kendi.
Oh, excuse me. God, between us and all.
Stop misgendering.
Ibram X. Kendi, the very famous multi-millionaire race industry profiteer. Grifter. Who famously wrote the book How to Be an Anti-Racist, which basically is in every library everywhere.
Every school.
And every school everywhere. God help us. inadvertently made himself redundant. Now, of course, the truth is he won't become redundant at all. But here's what he said, which I think is so extraordinary. More than a third of white students lied about their race on college applications.
Oh, okay.
And about a half of these applicants lied about being Native American.
Okay, I can. That is a shocking statistic.
Shocking.
Yes, this is Ibram X. Kendi's tweet. So that, let's say more than a third of white students lied about their race in college applications, and about half of these applications lied about being Native American.
And more than 3/4 of these students who lied about their race were accepted. So there's an advantage to being a person of color.
So he's saying that what he's actually saying is there's not these colleges' acceptances are not racist. In fact, they're
the
reversed.
opposite.
That if you say you're a person of color, they'll
bend over backwards to make sure you get a place.
So it disproves this whole America is structurally racist and society is structurally racist, as it was pointed out to him often on Twitter. And what did he do? How did he engage with them? And I suppose he wrote. Is he going to write a book about it? Is he
Quite
going
amazing. So he took the tweet down. He took the tweet down, and it's extraordinary, but luckily someone bright and brilliant had captured the tweet by that stage. And it's kind of amazing. This is Ibram X. Kendi, multi-millionaire profiteer from racism, basically saying there's no racism in college applications. And in fact, if anything, there is racism.
Against white
but it's
people.
against white people, and particularly against Asian people,
Yes.
who are very smart because their parents beat them around the head and neck so that they learn at school.
Yes.
And they end up doing really, really well at school. And if things were fair and everyone was being judged just by their grades, all the colleges would be full of Asian people.
Yeah.
And you know what? It should be. Because I would prefer a really, really smart Asian person to be piloting the plane or doing the surgery
operation,
or
yeah.
all the rest
But
of it.
no, Asians are
But this is
discriminated
not
against.
but funny enough, this is something we've been on to for a long time. It's not the first time we've noticed this, that there seems to be an advantage in being a person of colour.
Yes,
Salem,
yes.
over to you.
Yeah, so, we're all constantly told America is racist, but we're also constantly given examples of people pretending to be black or pretending to be a person of color, which would actually indicate, as Ibram X. Kendi has shown, that it seems to be an advantage.
Advantageous.
So first of all, I think, obviously Rachel Dolezal, she rose to be the head of Washington National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, only she was as white as...
The driven snow.
White as that railing we're lying on. And then there's, some of all the ones you might not know, but 𝙎𝙤𝙤 𝙃𝙪𝙣. She was an associate professor of African Studies at George Washington University.
No less.
And she was, she spent a lot of time, and this was, was saying, basically, she was a very angry person a lot of the time. And centerpiece of her rage was she was always telling people, you're not black enough to criticize there. Then, just as she was about to be exposed by a journalist, she told her colleagues and friends that she was actually born Jessica Krug, and confessed to being a white woman pretending to be black. And then
terrible. This
is a story from AP. Listen, all these stories are out there, but you probably haven't heard about a lot of them. The headline is, Indiana racial justice activist lied about being black. A high-profile Indiana activist known for racial and social justice advocacy has apologized for lying about being black. Satchel Cole, who uses, I love this, they and them pronouns. And by the way, AP, right, if she lied about her race, why are you respecting her they and
pronouns.
them bull crap, right?
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough.
Sorry, is it a man or a woman, right? Because we can't believe a word she says, and we're not bound by what she tells us to call her or describe her. She has worked with Indiana chapters of Black Lives Matter and showing up for racial justice. And she apologized in a social media post for taking space as a black person whilst knowing I am white. So then she said, I need to take accountability for my actions, and then doesn't take accountability for her actions, really. So that's her. And then we've got the Furman professor.
Oh, I spoke at Furman.
Yes.
Really beautiful place.
Yeah, of course. But this is a Kelly King Sharp, a scholar of African American history and an associate professor at Furman. Of course, who wouldn't want to be an associate professor at Furman?
No way. She was white.
Yeah, white as
white, and she was telling people she was black.
No, she was Chicana.
Chicana.
I love this. And actually, it's a bit like...
it's a bit like Elizabeth Warren, right?
Yeah, I'm coming to her. And it's a bit like the other person I'm coming to, Hilaria. So, yeah, Sharp, somebody who was at college, we were going, hold on, she's saying she's Chicana, or Hispanic, as ordinary people would call it. But she talked about being Hispanic, and she said her grandmother, or abuela.
Oh, her abuela.
Abuela.
I think we've heard that word before.
Yes,
from
that,
AOC, right?
AOC.
The abuela.
That's right. She
Should
had the abuela.
Should the abuela
That's
living in
where her-
dire poverty? And I was like, well, why wouldn't you send her a few shekels, you know?
Yes, yes.
You got the money, AOC.
Yes. So her abuela, that's where I heard the abuela from. Abuela, who came to the US during World War II and worked hard so I could become a teacher. This is what she's saying. And she alleged her grandmother was originally from Mexico, but yet when the scholars and journalists investigated, they found Kelly had no grandparents who were born outside the US or had Hispanic names. And then they searched the genealogical records and found the grandmother that Sharp said was from Mexico was actually born in Los Angeles to white parents and was residing in the US during all the census records of her upbringings. A servant was even employed and living at the home, and I would say that servant was Hispanic.
And can I just... Oh, yes, sorry.
The one I like best is the grandmother eventually married a wealthy white lawyer from Iowa. And I'm saying, wouldn't we all want to marry, back then, marry a white wealthy lawyer from Iowa?
It's kind of amazing. There seems to be something... Well, I mean, I think this is... I mean, it's kind of an obvious thing, but it really... These stories really emphasize it. That if you have an audience who want a certain story, and you give them that story, they are not going to ask difficult questions because they're so happy with the story.
Yes.
So if you turn up somewhere and say that you're Native American or that you're black, and they'd just love to have a black person, or they'd love to have a Native American, or they'd love to have a Hispanic, you'll probably get away with it because they're not going to question you because it's what they really want.
Especially also if it's a story, but also if it means money for them as well. And that brings me on to our next. And she used to be actually my favourite fake person of colour, Elizabeth Warren. I loved it for the sheer
Who
neck.
took over from her?
No,
I think I know.
The whitest of white. She was, she's the whitest of white. Like, I mean, she's whiter than I am. And I'll tell you, that's pretty white.
But it's really interesting. People didn't question her.
No.
You know.
Well, everyone was happy. See, because everyone was happy to accept the fake Indian Elizabeth Warren because they put her down as Native American on their books, and it helped with their fake diversity figures.
Yes.
And of course, it shot Elizabeth Warren to the top of any list of any job which is in the running for a job. I mean, there's an article, which cited Elizabeth Warren as the first woman of colour hired by Harvard Law School. And that came from the Harvard Law spokesman. Somebody was doing an article about people of colour employed at Harvard Law School, and he says, we've just employed our first person of colour, a woman called Elizabeth Warren. Just to wrap it up, I think my favourite person of colour now, a fake person of colour, is 𝙎𝙤𝙤 𝙃𝙪𝙣, who passed herself off as a mysterious, but fiery but mysterious Spanish person with an accent like this, married Alec Baldwin, Tapas Sangria, and Barcelona. Sí, and she passed herself off as a fake Spanish person.
To the extent that on Good Morning America, where she was cooking some kind of tapas dish, she couldn't remember the word for cucumber. How you call this?
Let's play a little clip there.
We have very few ingredients. We have tomatoes. We have how do you say it? Cucumbers. We have.
She then was exposed as basically having, being from white Boston and having an accent like those guys on Good Will Hunting. Only it was real. That's where she was brought up, not Spanish at all. Can I also just say, I suspect 𝙎𝙤𝙤 Baldwin is making a documentary about Alec Baldwin's current difficulties. And if anyone saw
Every cloud.
Yes.
I think is the maxim she's following there.
Yes. Well, what you've got a story.
I love this story. I love it. This is a very, very
funny.
This is a very, very funny story. And again, it's a kind of an identification story. So this thing of people saying to themselves, deciding, oh, you know what, I'm not a boy at all, I'm a girl, or I'm not a girl at all, I'm a boy. So this self-identification,
and we all have to accept it.
Apparently, according to liberals, it's a brilliant thing, and you always have to accept it, except for in one particular case. And this is a brilliant story that just came up last week. So. In Spain, they have a literary prize, a magnificent literary prize, by the way. Like it is the biggest. I would nearly suggest that it's the biggest literary prize in the world. It's €1 million.
Oh, actually, look, you talked earlier about cargo on the Danube.
What have we got?
That's a car. So we don't know. Actually, if anyone out there knows, what is all the cargo going up and down the Sava?
I think we should find that out for people. We're the journalists on the ground.
Okay,
we will find
I bet there will be someone. Put it in the YouTube comments. What is the main cargoes go up and down the Saba and the Danube River because there's a lot of it.
So, as I said, there is this huge literary prize in Spain, €1 million. Like, it's just huge money. And it was recently won by a woman, Carmen Mola, the novelist. And, you know, fantastic. What was amazing about it was she shattered the glass ceiling. Women were happy everywhere.
Because crime fiction is dominated by males,
absolutely.
Right?
And when she started writing, and she wrote crime fiction, when she started writing, like, it was very celebrated. She was being all the women's section of all these bookstores and all that. Turns out that Carmen Mola is a pen name for three men who are writing these books together. And the whole world has come to kind of a screeching halt, and all the liberals are up in arms, and they're saying it's all kinds of appropriation, and it's horrific, and it's like the worst thing that ever happened. And I'm thinking, no, I think it's great, and I think if anything, it really shows the literary brilliance of these guys. People bought those books thinking it was written by a woman, right?
That's amazing.
And they liked it, and they weren't disappointed. Turns out it was written by men. Who cares? I'm sorry, I'm missing why we should care about this, you know? But we're coming to the end of the show, and we have this amazing story. This is the most amazing story. This is why, be really, really careful of liberals taking care of your children, because you know what? They're not out to do your children any good. This is a frightening story.
It's a frightening story. I'll just read the headline. It's in the Daily Mail. Warren Buffett's billionaire business partner, Charlie Munger, is bankrolling a college dorm designed without windows in most of the 4,500 bedrooms.
In Santa Barbara.
In Santa Barbara. So 94% of the bedrooms will not have windows.
And he's giving them a grant of $200 million. They are required to use his design exactly as it is, or they don't get the money. Most of the bedrooms do not have windows. Like, just think about that. Think about being a young person, perhaps away from home for the very first time. You go to Santa Barbara, by the way. You are not going to the tundra. This is Santa Barbara, possibly the most beautiful place I have ever been to. And by the way, where the site is for this building is right by the coast. Yeah. So if there were windows, you would look out at the seaside. Instead of that, they have these children in windowless rooms.
Windowless rooms with 8 people in the rooms. The rooms have 8 beds in them, and
I think it's called a prison.
A prison, and I mean, I think a lot of prisons in America would have smaller rooms with, would have 2 beds.
Basically, what it is,
he says here he wants the 1,100 residents to spend their time in the common areas rather than their rooms. This is socialism. This is collectivism.
It's a social experiment. Yes. Let's see how this makes them all get collectivist.
Yes.
It's making them into collectivists. And it's not respecting their need for privacy, their need for fresh air, their need for a window in their bedroom.
Or individualism. See, if they had their own individual rooms, they could design it, they could by the way, they could have their own opinions, they could talk to people. I feel
like, did we not talk about this earlier? I think there are 2 exits to the building. Yes. So I would really like to understand how the fire marshal thinks that this is okay.
There will be fire exits, right? But you won't be allowed to, they'll be alarmed and all that. But for the normal day-to-day work, there's only 2 exits. So you're going to be meeting people all the time. You will never be alone.
It's absolutely frightening.
And that's what collectivists love.
And the reason this has become a news story is because an architect who was on the board at Santa Barbara University, who was like an advisor, an architect giving advice to them about architecture, basically said, I can't stomach this.
Yes.
I'm paraphrasing that. He said, I cannot stand by and allow this building to be built and not object right now to this horror show of what they're going to do to these thousands and thousands of students.
It's going to be something like the 14th most densely populated place on the planet, this
horrible.
Building. And this is their plan.
Great idea by a liberal.
We're here in Serbia, which was ruled by communists for 50 years. And someone, by the way, who's not off the right, was saying the other day, these buildings that the communists built, they really show communism, how they hated the workers, how they hated the common man. And this shows you how liberals hate people. They hate individuals. And that's what COP26 is about, is stopping people freedom. The car is the great thing that gives working people freedom. The cheap flight gives working people.
Well,
they want travel is for elites.
I'll tell you an example this week. Joanna Lumley, by the way, posh Joanna Lumley, who I used to just love, who was in a really funny comedy called Absolutely Fabulous. She now is an eco-warrior. She basically has come out and said people have to stop going on holidays abroad. This is the same Joanna Lumley who made a series of travel shows going to every corner of the globe on holidays. So it's okay for Joanna Lumley, not okay for the rest of us.
Well,
but we're coming to the end. We're coming to the end of the show. I have to say the weather is incredible.
Can I
here.
just say something?
Please.
That the university, of course, loves it because the city of Santa Barbara have told the university you cannot expand and get lots of fees that the government's going to pay for unless you give everyone there accommodation, because there's no accommodation in Santa Barbara. So the university is saying, let's just cram them in, and every one of those will pay 100 or 200,000 to our coffers. So it's a collectivist scam to torture your children.
So we got lovely messages from people, by the way. One of the messages was from DL Fendel. DL made he made an observation about my red pepper soup, which I will share with you, but I have to kind of strenuously disagree with DL at the same time. DL said what we could do is with the onions that they could be caramelized, which would sweeten the soup, and also that the red peppers could be put in the oven and roasted. That's a different soup, and it would be very, very nice, by the way, and it would be very, very nice. However, I would really suggest you make the red pepper soup exactly the way I described it. You will not believe how good it is. It is ludicrous how good it is. It's like a little miracle. The other thing I was going to say was the weather has been really beautiful around here. Even the Serbians have been kind of saying it's kind of weird.
Yes.
It's not normally like this. I think tomorrow we start with the rain, and I think we're going to have rain for about a week. But this week has been fantastic. We've had an amazing time since we've been here. And I have to say, we're going to, and somebody wrote and said, please share some recipes from Serbian recipes. One thing we had last night, you can have a look at this. We're going to just show it. We had this, and I'm going to ask here, our friend Nicola maybe will shout out the name of this thing, but it's like this cheese done in filu pastry, done in the oven. We're showing the footage of it now. Really gorgeous. And I think
it's like a cheese pie.
It's like a cheese. It's a really nice starter, rather big starter, by the way, that we got in a restaurant recently. I think it's very Serbian. The other thing that I'd say I really like as well is there's a Serbian salad, which is celery, tomato, and I'm going to have to get all the recipe ingredients for you and give that the next time. But it's a really nice fresh salad that we get.
Well, there's a real cafe society feeling.
Incredible cafe society. So people here, I don't know the last, I think Paris has this obviously. But you know, we lived in Bucharest. It wasn't like that in Bucharest. It's certainly not that like this in Los Angeles. Every street in this city has numerous coffee shops. Everyone is outside, and they're outside. Everyone's outside. My question is, what happens when the rain comes? What happens when it gets cold? Do they still sit outside? At the moment, they certainly are. Oh my God, our producer is telling us that they still sit outside in the bad weather. We'll show it. We'll show that. And you know, we've come to the very end of the show. I want to say, first of all, I want to remind everyone that it has been 5 months and 1 week since it was revealed that Hunter Biden used the N-word, and the mainstream media have still not reported on that. And that brings me beautifully to the last part of this, to say we are shooting this movie here. We need your help to make this a huge success. Please go to mysonhunter.com, mysonhunter.com, and give what you can.
Thank you, and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.